Hi and welcome back to another Motion Mile After Effects tutorial. It's Mackenzie Criswell here, and once again today I've got another great motion graphics design that we're going to break down. Okay, so let's just jump right into this. This is actually set up using a fairly simple particle system. We're using trap code particular as usual with particles, and really all we need here is an attached image that I've gone ahead and attached with the tutorial file and everything, which is just kind of this interesting atom shape that we put in the background here. And it's just one PNG image. If you want to create this on your own, you can do relatively the same thing with a couple of masks here. Let's see, let's resize this a bit. You can do the same thing with a number of masks to trace out circles and lines and connect and just make kind of this weird atom shape. But to go ahead and get started, we'll close out all these windows. We'll take our atom PNG image, it's 500 by 500 pixels, and we'll drag it into a new composition. And for this, we'll go ahead and rename this particle sprite. And if you use trap code particular, you already know what we're doing with this, but if not, we'll leave this composition alone and come back to it in a second. So what we'll do is go ahead and create a new composition. We'll do 1280 by 720p and 30 frames a second. Once again, as I usually say, if you want to crunch numbers and put in the exact same values I am, set your composition up this way. Anyway, 720p, 30 frames a second. We'll give ourselves about 10 seconds to work with. This actually, I thought it was a little long in the original render, so we might end up cutting that a little shorter. But we'll just go ahead and hit OK to get our new composition ready to go. Fit it to the composition. And yeah, okay, so the first thing we'll do is we need a new layer. So we'll come to Layer, New, Solid, and we'll go ahead and name this Particle System. And then we'll want the Effect Trap Code Particular. This is a third-party preset or plugin, so you'll have to go ahead and get this. And if we just go ahead and bring up the particle and fast forward a little bit, you can see we get this nice explosion. And I am using the most recent version of trap code particular 2.5.1, and as far as I know, the settings are almost identical to previous versions of trap code. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to our settings here and change the emitter behavior from continuous to explode. And what that'll do, instead of continuously emitting particles, it will just burst out particles at one point in the composition, and that will be it. Okay, and then we'll bring up the amount of particles quite a bit and just instantly go down to the particle settings and turn up the life all the way pretty high up so that we won't have any particles dying out, and you'll see we get a very simple kind of explosion of particles. And we don't really want any movement right now, so we'll go to the velocity here, set it to 0, the velocity random, set it to 0, the velocity distribution, hit it to 0, velocity from motion, change it to 0, and we'll get a very tiny white dot in the center. So to compensate for this, what we'll do is we'll come up to the emitter type window, change it from point to box. And what the setting will allow us to do is to set just kind of a size parameter for where the particles go. So we need the emitter size X to be very wide so that we can kind of pan through the design as you saw in the original render. And then, so we'll do about 5,000, looks like enough, and that'll give us enough room to pan to the left and the right. And we want the Y to be, just kind of take up the entire space here. So solid 2,000. And then we want a whole lot of Z depth, which will control where the particles are on the Z axis. So we really want a lot of difference between the particles. So we'll maybe set this to something like 10,000. And we should get something that looks not too different from kind of a star field at this point. Okay, and you'll also notice the particles are emitted a few frames in. So if we just bring this clip window setting here, this allows us to trim the composition up. So we'll move this first in point into the composition a little bit, right click and choose trim comp to work area. And what that'll do is just make sure we don't have that weird first frame where the particles pop on. Okay, so we've got that out of the way. And now we can go ahead and set up these cool textures. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and take that sprite composition that we created. We're coming back to it now. And we'll drop it here into the composition and then turn it off. Okay, so we'll come back to the particle system layer. And let's see, we'll come down to the particle settings here. And we want to change the particle type from sphere to sprite. And then there's another tab here called texture, and that will allow us to choose a layer, in this case sprite. And we'll get a warning about the layer being pretty big. Like it says, ideally you'd want particle sprites to be fairly small, but we need some nice detail with this particular particle system. So you can just ignore that warning safely. And you can't tell right now, but the particles are there. They're just incredibly, incredibly small. So let's see. And I'm killing the black background here so that we can see. So we're going to go ahead and come to the particle size. Where is that? To the particle size right down here and turn it up until we can see the particles a lot better. Okay, very nice. And now what we'll want are just quite a few more particles probably. Okay, looks very, very nice. And we've got this nice bulky kind of layer sticking in the middle, and that's not what I want. So there is a random seed setting that if we adjust will just allow us to change some of the settings. So we can just turn this dial until we find kind of a nice shot with some particles in the foreground, some way in the background, some in the middle. Okay, looks nice. And if we look in the original again, you'll notice that these are white, these layers. And the quick way to just kind of change the color of this particle sprite is if we come to the particle type and change it from sprite to sprite fill. What that'll allow us to do is just take the alpha channel of the, I guess, particle sprite and just use what isn't transparent and just apply like a fill effect on top of it. And it will be sampling from the particle color setting. So now these are all white, and let's go ahead and try to do a little bit more to randomize this. So the first thing we'll do is we'll come to the particle settings under rotation, and we'll choose and we'll rotate on the z-axis just a bit, and then we'll turn up the rotation speed just a little bit so that we'll get kind of the particles moving. That's actually a bit fast, 0.5. I ended up putting it right at around 0.1, 0.2, so they get just kind of a very slow movement from the particles. And they're all pretty uniform. So what we'll do is we'll turn up the random speed quite a bit so that they'll be moving at different speeds. Again, we'll actually make the random speed again about 0.1 so that they'll be moving, but they'll be moving at different speeds. We'll also turn up the random rotation setting to really just get some more random particles. We'll turn that up as high as it'll go. Let's see, we'll want to do quite a bit of size randomness here. Let's see, we'll do opacity random. That'll also do some cool stuff. We don't want to go too heavy with the opacity random. Okay, and looking good, I think. Yeah, so we'll go ahead and start with this particle system right here. We might change it a little bit, but for right now we're just going to stick with this and go ahead and set up some text and cameras and a background. And believe it or not, there's actually no lights in this scene. I wanted to keep it pretty simple, so this is all done with just a background gradient. We'll grab a text here, and we'll go ahead and type out motion mile Okay. And let's see, we'll scale that down a little and we'll align it to the center. Okay. And we'll make it 3D. Okay, so it'll kind of blend in here. And okay, so actually real quick, let's go back to the particular settings and come back to the random seed. This particle right here is just kind of bugging me. Whoops. This particle right here in particular is bugging me. So let's see. Oh, okay. Oh yeah, that's nice. Okay, and then we'll do a layer new camera, and we'll do a 50 millimeter camera, and 50 millimeter is a pretty good choice for camera. I'll just explain really quickly because I get a lot of questions about it whenever I talk about cameras in After Effects. And the reason you want to go with 50 millimeter lenses a lot of the time, and that I typically do in tutorials, is because a 50 millimeter After Effects lens, theoretically it's a lens, is basically the same as your eyesight. So what that means is what we're looking at right here in the composition won't change with a 50. Well, let me just show you real quick. So if we instead go to the preset and change this to something like a 15 millimeter lens, hit OK. Now when we're looking through the composition, we're going to get a much different focal distance or focal length. And so it's going to drastically change what the composition looks like. And if you know that you want a different focal length, and this is the kind of design that you want, this is definitely still a great looking design, but it's not what we've been designing around. So instead of that 15 millimeter focal length, when we come back to the camera and we instead go ahead and create a 50 millimeter camera, what we'll get is something that looks basically exactly the same as the camera that we had set up before. So that's just a quick explanation. I hope that answers some questions that I had gotten. And what else to do here? Okay, so we'll go ahead and just create the background real quick. And we're just going to do that with another new layer. And we'll call this background layer. And let's see, we'll solo it for a sec. And we'll need a gradient. And in After Effects, it's called the ramp. Oh, I guess they've changed the name to gradient ramp. Okay, so let's see. We'll bring the black up here and the white maybe over here to the corners. We'll play off the corners instead of the bottom edges. Bring that a little closer. And we'll change it to, I guess, maybe a radial. And okay, so fit that again. And in the bottom, we'll just get kind of a nice hot color. So maybe an orangish. A little bit more of the red orange than the yellow orangish color, if you know what I mean. Okay, and then up in the corner we'll do actually kind of a pink. Yeah, I guess it's more of like a peach than a pink, but just these colors. I've been playing around with gradients a lot, and these two colors seem to mix really well. Okay, so we'll go ahead and drop that in the background, and we get a great look right off the bat. And let's see, we'll do a new solid here, and we'll call this blur. And we'll come back to that in a second, but we'll just make it an adjustment layer by clicking this button here. And if you don't know what an adjustment layer is, basically anything we put on top of this layer will transfer over the entire composition. So that's what that does. And then we'll also just do another new solid, and we'll make this one black. Hit OK. And we'll actually call this vignette. And I do like this look, but it's quite bright. So what I'm going to do is change the blending mode of this layer here to soft light. And we'll grab the ellipse tool. And we'll just double click and we'll get a nice ellipse mask. And let's see, we'll change the blending mode to subtract, or the mode to subtract. Hit feather, bring up the feather quite a bit. Hit T to bring up the opacity, and we'll bring down the opacity quite a bit, and that'll just kind of help diffuse some of the brighter colors a little bit and give it a nicer look. Okay, so as you can see, we're actually pretty close to the original design, as far as the color and everything goes. And all that we really have left to set up is kind of the really elegant blur. So let's go ahead and do that. And we're actually doing this within the camera setup here. So we're going to go to the camera options and turn on depth of field and start to play with this. So let's see, we'll turn up the blur a lot. And as long as you didn't move your text around, the focus distance of your camera should automatically be set to where the text is in 3D space. So you shouldn't have to really worry about trying to focus on the text within this 3D composition that we're building. So just a quick tip there. And then we'll turn up the aperture a lot. We might go as high as like 100, probably not over 100. Okay, and so that's a really, really intense, nice blur. Yeah, that looks good. Okay, and let's see. Maybe we'll bring down the aperture a little bit. There's just not enough in focus here. Maybe that's a little too much. Let's try like 85. 90. Okay, I think we might have found our sweet spot. And so now we'll go ahead and just add a little bit of camera movement. So we'll come to the camera and let's see, we'll come to the position or the orientation. And if we come to the orientation setting, come to the beginning of the composition, we'll just take this middle control here and pull it to the left so that we can't really even see our title. And we'll go ahead and keyframe that by hitting the stopwatch, come to the very end of the composition, and then we had about we went to 327 here, so we'll do negative 327 on the other end. And what that should do is just kind of give us a nice pan through this 3D world that we've set up, and it will kind of very elegantly reveal the title. And you'll notice After Effects is having a very hard time keeping up with the rendering here, and that is something that should be mentioned. Rendering this particular sequence is not going to be very friendly, obviously depending on what computer you're using, but you're probably looking at 20 to 30 minutes at least to render this kind of animation out, just because there's a lot of blurring and stuff going on. And so it's not exactly too easy on your CPU and GPU. So I guess that's just a fair warning. Let's see what else we'll do. We'll come back into the particle settings and we'll mess with this random seed again, because now this is getting in the way. I will tell you, I mess around with Trapcode particularly a lot, and this random seed setting has been a lifesaver more times than I care to admit. Okay, so nice look. One more thing just to kind of seal this all in, tuck it in nicely. We'll come to this blur layer that we created a second ago. We'll grab the camera blur, or camera lens blur as it is, and drop it on there. Let's see, we'll change the type to decagon. Turn up the blur quite a bit. Make sure we're repeating the edge pixels. And let's see, we'll turn up the gain quite a bit. Turn down the threshold maybe. And then we'll again do that same ellipse mask. And if we hit subtract and then feather it quite a bit. So we'll do about 450. What we should get is just kind of a nice overall blur that will blur out the edges and just kind of seal in the design nicely. So yeah, I think we're there. So and yeah, that's about it for this particular design. If you liked what you saw, feel free to check out more motion graphics designs at motionmile.com. There's also a bunch of templates and things there, I believe. So feel free to check all of that out. But that's it for now. I'll see you next time.